Picture this. You've spent years dreaming of your child's wedding day. You've poured in not just money, but your love and support to make it perfect. A day filled with joy, family, and memories to last a lifetime. Now imagine finding out just days before the big event that you've been deliberately excluded. No invitation, no explanation, and to make it worse, they've made sure you won't even be allowed through the doors. How would you feel? Angry? Heartbroken? Betrayed? This is the nightmare one parent faced when their own daughter decided they weren't welcome at the wedding they were paying for. It's not just a story of hurt feelings, but a deeper exploration of family loyalty, resentment, and the limits of forgiveness. What would you do in their shoes? Stay silent and accept the slight, or take matters into your own hands, even if it means risking everything? Family relationships are often complicated, and this story is no exception. Ava, the 27-year-old daughter, had always been a challenging child to raise, strong-willed, headstrong, and often at odds with her parents. Despite the difficulties, her father had always tried to support her, providing the resources and guidance she needed to thrive. When she announced her engagement, it felt like a turning point, a chance for reconciliation, perhaps even a new chapter in their relationship. Her parents, especially her father, were overjoyed. The thought of Ava walking down the aisle, happy and in love, seemed like the culmination of years of effort, patience, and hope. Financially, Ava and her fiancé were struggling, and they couldn't afford the wedding of their dreams. Eager to help and bridge the gap that years of tension had created, her father stepped in. He offered to pay for everything: a lavish venue, exquisite catering, beautiful floral arrangements, not just as a gift, but as a gesture of love and faith in their bond. Yet, beneath the surface, there were cracks. A history of misunderstandings and unresolved tensions lingered between father and daughter. Still, he never imagined these issues could culminate in something so severe, so personal. As the big day approached, the father watched the planning unfold, believing he had a seat at the table, a place of honor. He had no idea what was brewing behind the scenes or how deeply his daughter's resentment ran. The first sign that something was amiss came a few days before the wedding, when the father decided to make a small, thoughtful adjustment to the guest list. His brother, who had just confirmed his availability, deserved a seat at the celebration, he thought. After all, it was a family event, one he had worked so hard to make special. Confident in his role as the financial backer and, more importantly, the father of the bride, he called the wedding planner to add his brother's name. What happened next was a punch to the gut. The wedding planner hesitated. Polite but firm, he explained that the guest list was already finalized. It was the kind of brush off that felt unusual, almost deliberate. The father, sensing something was wrong, pressed for more information. He insisted on seeing the guest list, certain it was a minor mix-up that could easily be resolved. But the planner's reluctance to share the list only heightened his suspicions. Finally, after a tense exchange and a threat to escalate the matter to the planner's boss, the list arrived in his inbox. He opened it, scanning through the names, searching for his own and his wife's. His stomach dropped as he realized their names weren't there. Not only were they absent, but further digging revealed something even more devastating: explicit instructions to block them from entering the venue. The betrayal hit him like a tidal wave. This wasn't an oversight or a miscommunication. It was deliberate, calculated, and cruel. His mind raced with questions. Why would Ava do this? What had he done to deserve such treatment? Heartbreak quickly gave way to anger, and he picked up the phone, determined to confront his daughter. But every call went straight to voicemail. He left messages, each more desperate than the last, begging for an explanation. Still, no response came. The silence was deafening, and with each passing hour, the reality of the situation became harder to ignore. The wedding he had financed, the celebration he had imagined himself proudly attending, had become a painful reminder of how fractured their relationship had truly become. Worse, he was powerless to get the answers he so desperately needed. As the days crawled by, the father's frustration turned into a mix of heartbreak and fury. Ava's silence wasn't just a refusal to explain. It felt like a confirmation that she truly didn't want him there. Each unanswered call, each ignored message was like pouring salt on an open wound. He replayed their last interactions in his mind, searching for clues. Had he said something wrong? Done something unforgivable? The uncertainty gnawed at him, feeding a sense of helplessness he hadn't felt in years. It all came to a head 2 days before the wedding. With no other way to reach her, he drove to her apartment, determined to confront her face to face. When he arrived, her fiancé answered the door, his expression tense. Ava was too busy with wedding preparations to talk, the fiancé claimed. Too busy to spare a few minutes for her own father? It felt like another slap in the face. But the real blow came when Ava finally emerged, her demeanor icy and indifferent. She barely met his gaze as he demanded an explanation. "Why, Ava?" he asked, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and sorrow. "What did I do to deserve this?" Her response was cold and cutting, dismissing his concerns as if they were trivial. She accused him of making the wedding about himself and claimed that she didn't want any drama on her big day. Her words were a knife to the heart. This wasn't just about a misunderstanding. This was deeply rooted resentment, the kind that had festered over years. The father, blindsided and overwhelmed, tried to reason with her, to remind her of everything he had done to make her wedding a reality. But Ava wouldn't budge. She was resolute in her decision, her tone suggesting that she had moved on from whatever relationship they once had. As the argument escalated, the fiancé awkwardly intervened, urging the father to leave. Humiliated and emotionally shattered, he had no choice but to walk away. On the drive home, his mind raced with conflicting emotions, grief, anger, and the growing realization that the daughter he had sacrificed so much for had completely shut him out of her life. That night, he couldn't sleep. The betrayal felt unbearable. But the more he thought about it, the angrier he became. He wasn't just a guest being excluded from a party. He was the one who had made the party possible. Every dollar, every detail had come from his pocket, yet he was being treated like an outsider. The injustice of it all ignited something in him. He couldn't just stand by and let this happen. He had to take a stand, not for revenge, but for respect. The final straw came the night before the wedding, as the father sat alone, staring at the pile of invoices, receipts, and contracts he had meticulously kept. Each document was a reminder of his investment, not just financially, but emotionally, in a day that now felt like it belonged to everyone except him. The weight of Ava's exclusion bore down on him, turning his heartbreak into a smoldering anger. He couldn't shake the thought, why should he fund an event where he wasn't welcome? Where he was actively shunned, barred from even stepping foot inside. As he mulled over his options, a grim determination began to take root. He hadn't gone through all this. Years of sacrifices, thousands of dollars, countless sleepless nights worrying about Ava's happiness, just to be treated as if he didn't matter. If Ava didn't want him at her wedding, then perhaps there shouldn't be a wedding at all. With shaking hands, he began making calls. First, the wedding planner, who was startled to hear from him so late in the process. Calm but firm, the father informed him that all services were to be canceled immediately. The planner stammered, trying to push back, but the father's tone left no room for negotiation. "I'm the one paying the bills," he said, his voice resolute. "And if I'm not welcome, neither is my money." Next came the venue. Then the caterer. One by one, he methodically unraveled the threads of a celebration that had once been his labor of love. Each call felt like both an act of defiance and a painful acknowledgement of the fractured relationship that had brought him to this point. The vendors were confused, some even sympathetic, but ultimately they complied. After all, their contracts were with him, and he had every legal right to terminate them. The final call was to the florist, whose cheerful voice quickly turned somber as the father explained the situation. He tried to keep his composure, but as he hung up the phone, the enormity of what he had just done hit him like a wave. This wasn't just a financial decision. It was a statement, a stand against the disrespect and betrayal he felt so deeply. For better or worse, he had taken back control. As he sat in the silence of his home, a mixture of relief and guilt settled over him. He knew this would devastate Ava and likely burn whatever fragile bridge remained between them. But in that moment, he didn't care. He had given her everything, and she had shut him out. If she wanted a wedding without him, then she could have one without his money too. The morning of the wedding arrived, But instead of the joyful chaos of a bride's big day, there was confusion, panic, and outrage. Eva woke to frantic calls from her wedding planner, her fiance, and vendors, all with the same shocking news. The venue had been canceled, the caterers weren't showing up, and the once beautiful floral arrangements were no longer being delivered. The wedding her father had meticulously planned and funded had unraveled overnight, leaving her with nothing but a shell of an event. As the reality set in, Ava's emotions boiled over. She was livid, humiliated, and confused. Guests were already en route, some even flying in from out of town expecting a grand celebration. How could everything fall apart so suddenly? Her mind raced back to the confrontation with her father. Had he really gone this far? Would he? It seemed unthinkable, but the evidence was undeniable. The chaos spread like wildfire. Friends and family began to ask questions as whispers of the wedding's collapse reached the guests. Ava's fiance tried to hold things together, making frantic calls in an attempt to salvage the day, but it was too late. Venues weren't available on such short notice, caterers had no means to prepare, and the flowers were gone. What should have been a joyous occasion became a logistical nightmare. Meanwhile, the father sat at home, numb to the world. He had heard through family members about the chaos his actions had caused. The phone calls started rolling in, some from relatives berating him for ruining the wedding, others quietly commending him for standing his ground. He listened to each one, but he couldn't bring himself to respond. His mind was consumed by the weight of what he had done. There was a certain satisfaction in knowing he had taken back control, but it was overshadowed by a heavy sense of loss. This was his daughter, and as much as he had felt justified in his actions, the thought of their already fragile relationship being reduced to ashes was almost too much to bear. At the wedding site, or what remained of it, Ava's anger reached a boiling point. She finally called her father, her voice trembling with rage and tears. "How could you do this to me?" she demanded. But her father, though calm, didn't back down. "You made it clear I wasn't part of this day," he replied, his voice heavy with emotion. "You can't shut me out of your life and expect me to fund it too." The argument that followed was bitter and raw, years of unresolved pain spilling out on both sides. Ava accused him of being controlling, of trying to make everything about himself. He countered, pointing out the profound disrespect of excluding the very person who had made the wedding possible. Neither side seemed willing to budge, and by the end of the call, the gap between them felt wider than ever. For Ava, the day she had dreamed of was ruined. For her father, the decision to cancel the wedding brought no real sense of victory, only a hollow reminder of how fractured their relationship had become. The climax left everyone reeling, with no clear resolution in sight, only the fallout from a decision that would haunt them both for years to come. In the days following the canceled wedding, the dust began to settle, but the emotional wreckage remained. Ava and her fiancé tried to pick up the pieces, hosting a small gathering with a handful of close friends and family at their apartment, a far cry from the grand celebration they had planned. Though they tried to put on brave faces, the disappointment was palpable. The absence of the venue, the food, and the carefully curated decor was glaring. But the deeper sting came from the broken relationship that overshadowed it all. Ava couldn't stop replaying her father's words. "You can't shut me out of your life and expect me to fund it too." At first, she dismissed them as controlling and vindictive. But as the initial anger wore off, they began to linger in her mind, forcing her to confront the years of tension that had built up between them. Was this entirely his fault? Or had she, in her own way, contributed to the widening gap? Her father, on the other hand, found himself in a similarly reflective state. The immediate satisfaction of canceling the wedding had long faded, replaced by a gnawing sense of guilt. He spent hours thinking about Ava as a little girl, remembering her smile, her laughter, and the dreams he had for their relationship. He questioned whether he had gone too far, whether there had been another way to make his feelings known without causing so much pain. The decision to cancel the wedding, while justified in his mind at the time, now felt like a permanent stain on an already fragile bond. Family members took sides, further complicating matters. Some rallied behind Ava, accusing her father of being petty and vengeful, while others supported his decision, arguing that she had crossed a line by excluding him from the celebration he funded. The rift between father and daughter became a topic of heated debate, with everyone weighing in but no clear resolution in sight. As the weeks turned into months, the silence between them grew deafening. Neither could bring themselves to reach out, each waiting for the other to make the first move. It wasn't until Ava's mother intervened that any progress was made. She pleaded with both sides, urging them to meet and talk, not to rehash the past, but to find a way forward. "You're both hurting," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "but the longer you let this fester, the harder it will be to heal." Reluctantly, they agreed. Their first meeting was awkward, filled with long silences and hesitant glances, but slowly, the conversation began to flow. They spoke about the wedding, about the years of misunderstandings and hurt that had brought them to this breaking point. There were no easy fixes or grand gestures of forgiveness, but there was a sense of recognition, a realization that both had contributed to the fractured relationship and that both bore the responsibility of mending it. The resolution wasn't a fairy tale. Their relationship remained strained, but it was no longer broken beyond repair. Over time, they began to rebuild, one conversation at a time. Ava started to understand the pain her actions had caused, while her father acknowledged the impact of his decision. They both carried scars from the ordeal, but those scars became a reminder of what they stood to lose if they didn't work to heal. Every story has two sides, and this one is no exception. At its heart, this tale is not just about a canceled wedding or a bitter argument. It's about the fragile, complicated nature of family relationships. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. How do years of unresolved tension and misunderstandings shape the way we treat each other? When does standing up for yourself cross the line into retaliation? And most importantly, is there ever a point where the damage becomes too great to repair? For Ava, the wedding was supposed to be a celebration of love and new beginnings. But her decision to exclude her father created a ripple effect that no amount of flowers or decorations could fix. For her father, the decision to cancel the wedding may have felt like reclaiming his dignity, but it also came at the cost of severing an already delicate bond with his daughter. Both made choices fueled by deep-seated emotions, and both were left with consequences they couldn't have fully anticipated. So who was in the wrong? Was it Ava for shutting her father out of a moment he helped create? Or was it her father for tearing down everything in an act of hurt and anger? Perhaps the answer lies somewhere in the middle, a sobering reminder that in families, there are no perfect heroes or villains, just people doing the best they can with the emotional tools they have. As you reflect on this story, ask yourself, what would you have done in their shoes? Would you have walked away quietly, letting the exclusion slide for the sake of peace? Or would you have taken a stand, even if it meant risking everything? And if you've ever faced a similar situation, how did you handle it? This story challenges us to think about our own boundaries, our own values, and the ways we navigate conflict in our closest relationships. It's a powerful reminder that while family can bring us our greatest joys, it can also be the source of our deepest pain. But in the end, perhaps the most important takeaway is this: forgiveness, understanding, and healing are always possible if we're willing to take the first step. What's your take on this? Share your thoughts, your experiences, and your perspective below. After all, every family has its own story, and every story has something to teach us.